Hello everyone, many thanks for joining us today for the first in a two-part series of webinars about the General Data Protection Regulation. I'm Warren Butler, Head of Marketing at Preact, and I'm delighted to be joined by our guest presenters, Piers Clayden, Director at Technology Lawyers Clayden Law, and Nick Richards, CEO at elearning, who are one of the pioneers in accredited e-learning. A few bits of housekeeping before we kick off. We've set all the lines to mute to remove any background noise, but you can ask questions as we go, and we'll be on hand at the end for a brief Q&A session. We are recording the session today, so probably tomorrow morning we'll be sending through the recording of that. It'll also be on our YouTube channel as well. So the countdown to GDPR coming into force is well underway, but many people are still trying to get their heads around what this means for their business. As a CRM partner that supports Microsoft Dynamics 365, at Preact we're frequently speaking to businesses that are looking for practical advice about GDPR to understand how it will impact on their management of personal data in CRM. GDPR is a hot topic at the moment, so we're thrilled to have Piers and Nick here today to offer some clarity about the regulation, to explain what this means in the context of CRM, and to introduce some training resources that will equip you with the knowledge that you need to prepare your workforce. So to kick off, let me bring in Nick and Piers. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Warren.
Warren, thank you. This is Piers here. Thank you for joining this call. I will be looking, first of all, at the legal aspects of GDPR in the context of CRM systems, some backgrounds, sort of practicalities of when it comes into effect and who it's going to affect. And then more specifically, how GDPR will affect organisations using CRM systems, and then some particular considerations for sales and marketing personnel.
Thanks, Piers. This is Nick here from elearning. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. When Piers has finished his section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can potentially help organisations both understand and prepare for the GDPR. I'll talk a little bit about and demonstrate an e-learning solution that we're working on that we are getting a lot of interest in, and just talking a little bit about how we can help an organisation implement and train upon GDPR. So I'll hand back to Piers.
Great, thanks, Nick. So the General Data Protection Regulation has been published now for over a year, and it actually comes into force May next year. It is going to affect organisations big and small across the land. Effectively, anyone who handles personal data will face an increased burden of compliance under the GDPR. Not only that, they are looking at a higher liability profile, given the fact that penalties for non-compliance have drastically, the potential for penalties for non-compliance are much more severe, potentially up to 4% of global annual group turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is the higher, for the most severe, for the most serious breaches of the regulation. Also, individuals themselves will have a much easier way to seek compensation where their privacy rights have been infringed, and leading some commentators to potentially equate this GDPR to the kind of new PPI type regime, where we may be facing much more in the way of some class actions and group actions on behalf of individuals. As I said, it will affect every organisation up and down the land that sits on any personal data, and this is despite the Brexit withdrawal. The UK government has already indicated that it is going to bring into UK law this European regulation. So it will be law anyway in the UK from May next year, and once we exit the EU, it will remain part of our regulatory landscape. So in terms of achieving compliance, I'm finding that it's the IT departments and technology generally which will bear the burden of compliance, but nevertheless this is very much a cross-organisational issue and requires ownership and project management from board level, and input from sales, marketing, HR and supply chain divisions within the organisation. So anyone who's using a CRM will either be doing so as a data controller or a data processor. Primarily, we'll be looking here at obligations as a data controller. So those organisations who are listening who handle personal data for their own uses rather than doing it on behalf of someone else. That's not to say that where your CRM is a bought-in system and is an outsourced service provision, perhaps a SaaS offering, that is not to say that gets data controllers off the hook. Far from it, in fact. Data controllers will be primarily liable for not only their own breaches, but also those of their data processors. And so it is vitally important that anyone who is using an outsourced service provision make sure they choose a partner who is capable of demonstrating compliance with the full range of the GDPR. So much is unchanged in terms of the principles of data protection. These very much reflect the current landscape. Data must be lawfully, fairly, and transparently processed. The purposes for which it is being used must be specified and explicit to individuals. The data must not go further than it is needed for the purpose for which it's being processed. In other words, it must be adequate but no more. Must be accurate and up to date, and must be kept for no longer than necessary. And there are security measures that must be ensured. So, as I say, that's all quite familiar to us under the current regime. Where the GDPR adds a further overlay and potentially a much greater compliance burden is around this concept of accountability. And that is the concept that it's not only complying with the law, but very much being seen to comply with the law. So organisations are at all times having to demonstrate what steps they are doing to comply with the GDPR, and training and where the module training platform comes in from elearning can play a great part in demonstrating that sort of compliance. And I mentioned transparency as well. The whole point about the GDPR is to give individuals much greater rights over how their data is being used by organisations, and it is incumbent on organisations who are holding people's personal data to be transparent about how they are going to use it. And one of the ways in which they achieve that transparency is through what are typically called privacy notices or privacy policies. And called in the GDPR, they're actually called information notices. And the requirements for what has to go into that information notice are much longer than they currently are under the Data Protection Act. But what's really important from a CRM point of view is to make sure that whatever you're doing behind the scenes through your CRM is reflected in the information notice, the publicly accessible, publicly facing declaration about how you're using people's data. It's very, very important that there is no gaps between the two. One should reflect the other. And from a CRM point of view, where you're gathering data from third parties, for example, bought-in marketing lists, where you haven't collected that personal data directly from the individual, organisations will be under an obligation to provide these information notices to the individuals at least within 1 month of that collection. And again, another similar concept under the GDPR is that processing of personal data needs to be lawful. And the way in which processing is lawful is by complying with some of the processing grounds. And And I've listed there some of the most heavily used ones, which are consent. The processing is necessary for the performance of a contract between the organisation and the individual data subject, or the processing is in the legitimate interest of the controller. And for special categories of data, that's data that deals with people's race or religion or health and other factors as well. There are different and much stricter grounds for making that processing lawful, that which include explicit consent, which is an even higher burden of consent. So looking more specifically now at the consent piece, under the GDPR, the threshold for a valid consent from a data subject is now much higher. It must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. The silence or a pre-tick boxes, unfortunately, is no longer enough. There needs to be a clear affirmative action from the data subject, from the individual, as to the consent that they're giving. And that consent has to be, as I said, specific to the processing that's happening. So in other words, the information notice needs to set out line by line the kind of processing activities that the organisation is going to be doing. A bundled one-liner about we will process your personal data for our own internal business purposes will no longer be enough. Note also that the consent can be withdrawn at any time, so it's important that organisations have in place processes that record those consents, and indeed you're able to easily action any consent withdrawals. Just finally looking at the children, for organisations dealing with children, the GDPR currently states that their definition of child is anyone under 16, and in those circumstances, consent needs to be verified through. Consent needs to be got from a parent or a guardian, and that needs to be a verifiable consent as well. So just note that it's possible within the UK that we may lower that. We do have the freedom to lower that age. It's possible that that may go down to 12 or 13, but at the moment we've got no definitive answer on that. So in terms of what to do within an organisation using CRMs, just sort of rounding up really what I've already touched on, it's important that the publicly facing information notice actually reflects the reality of what's been done through the CRM. The CRM needs to be constantly reviewed for accuracy and making sure you're not keeping things longer than you need to, and you need to ensure that at all times what you're doing, you can demonstrate you're doing it in compliance with GDPR principles and on fair and lawful processing grounds. The GDPR also has a more specific requirement for organisations to put in place technical and organisational measures to ensure that individuals' privacy is secure, and also that data privacy is baked in, if you like, into an organisation, such that it's not seen as an afterthought and as a tick box exercise, but very much is seen at the start, beginning, and end of any process. And one of the great ways that can be demonstrated is through staff training, to make sure everyone who handles personal data is aware of their responsibilities under the GDPR, and indeed making sure that the data that is being collected is only as detailed as it needs to be and no more, and perhaps looking at ways in which staff can be given different access for different categories of data, so that not all staff are given details to all of the raw personal data, and that's a great way of minimising privacy risks. Pseudonymisation is also another way of doing that. So instead of you have the raw personal data, and then you assign tokens and user IDs to that data, and therefore it's possible that certain categories of staff only ever need to look at the IDs rather than the raw personal data. Organisations need to show that they are, as I said, looking at privacy at the beginning of any new process or activity they're about to undertake, and the way in which they do that, certainly for high-risk processing, is through what are called privacy impact assessments, which look to foresee or predict potentially any privacy risk there may be, and put in place any necessary and appropriate risk mitigation measures. Using a CRM for profiling, in this context, profiling means predicting or use of a process to analyse or predict behaviour. This requires explicit consent from individuals, so an even higher burden than the consent I've mentioned earlier. And then also be aware that individuals have enhanced rights under the GDPR. For example, the right to have their data erased if it's no longer necessary for the processing. This is one of the more high-profile ones. So organisations need to have in place processes to action these requests from customers as and when they come in. And then finally, the GDPR has introduced, and this is one of the other big changes in the GDPR, the mandatory breach notification requirement, which requires that the regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office, needs to be informed within 72 hours of becoming aware of any security breach that affects personal data. And therefore, the clock starts ticking on becoming aware, and that is 72 hours, not 72 business hours. So everyone needs to be aware of their roles and responsibilities in the event of a security breach to enable the organisation to meet that deadline. And now I'm going to hand back to Warren just to touch on some particular other considerations for CRM owners.
Thanks, Piers. Yeah, CRM owners, which includes administrators and marketing teams, do have a lot to consider in preparation for GDPR. And we've picked out 5 points that are likely to occupy a lot of attention. A fundamental question is going to be to establish if the CRM technology you are using is GDPR compliant. Many of the people who have registered for this webinar are using Microsoft Dynamics, and the great news there is that Microsoft has already committed to making sure that Dynamics 365 and its cloud services are fully GDPR compliant by May 2018. Piers talked about adapting CRM to restrict access to personal data. So consider what sensitive data exists in your database and how this is currently protected. And if you aren't currently using the types of controls that might help would include field level security as well as role-based permissions, which can be applied so that CRM users only have access to what they need. As we've seen, consent is a critical GDPR consideration. And that's especially pertinent when thinking about email marketing and how people opt in to receive your messages. If your email marketing solution isn't connected to CRM, more effort is going to be required to ensure that these processes are GDPR compliant simply because customer data is sitting in different places. By contrast, with an integrated solution, you can build double opt-in processes that track when consent was given and automatically attach this to a central contact record in CRM that provides a definitive record of these actions. And that also helps to reduce the risk of a GDPR breach that could occur if marketing messages are repeatedly sent to individuals who've unsubscribed. Poor quality data is often a major cause of fines for breaches of the data protection legislation that we have today. As Piers touched on, these penalties are going to be significantly higher when GDPR comes into force. Problems such as duplicated records, outdated or missing information could well prove costly. And in our next webinar, we'll be focusing on the topic of improving data quality. Finally, you should consider if your processes for capturing, managing and storing data are GDPR compliant. Today, for many people, it's likely to be extremely challenging, if not impossible, to demonstrate compliance without having a deeper understanding of GDPR. So at this stage, I'm going to hand back to Nick to talk about how elearning are helping businesses get up to speed in their readiness for GDPR.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Hi, everybody. It's Nick here from elearning. Just really wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the next steps. We've heard from Piers and Warren about what needs to be done and all the issues that you need to consider. And I guess the first thing that we've got to think about is what do we have to do? And the we is quite important here because the we is, lots of different people. So we thought it might be helpful, and the approach that we've taken to our kind of our training package, if you like, is to base it on who we are, what do we need to do, and once that's defined, then we can work out what those people need to help them ensure the organisation's GDPR compliant. So at the top of the tree, or bottom of the tree, depending on where you sit, there's the board, which could be the trustees, the owners, the founding members, the controlling people within the organisation. And they might be wondering why they need to do it, what is it, why is it important. So the first thing is the board, the board, as we'll call them, need to be aware of the importance of GDPR. As Piers mentioned, there's a monetary cost, but also a reputational cost. If you're a charity or an educational establishment, there's big questions about whether you'd actually be fined or not. But the issue is not just financial, it's reputation. And so it's important that the board understand this. And if you don't have support of your senior management or the owners of the business, you're not going to get the people, the resource, the money, the time, or the drive. So really getting a board brought in is quite important. So that's a word that we'll refer to in our session. The next one is this happy-looking lady. We call her the practitioner, and this is a term that you'll find out there if you start Googling what am I supposed to do. The practitioner is the person who has the responsibility, probably given by the board, to make sure it happens. So basically the buck stops here. They've got to make sure it happens. That somebody could be the business owner, could be a board member, could be a director, could be a senior manager. It might be one of you on the call at the moment. You've got the responsibility to make sure it's done. But whoever they are, they need to know everything that has to be done. They need to know everything about the GDPR and why it needs to be done. Because ultimately it's their responsibility to report back to the board to say that they're compliant. The next person in the chain, we call them foundation. So foundation really more refers to a level of understanding of the person needs, and these are the people who actually got to do it. So how did I get this job? This is the poor schmuck, if you like, in the organisation that's been given the job to make it happen. The person who's actually got to do it. Once again, it could be anybody. It could be the practitioner. It could be somebody on the board. It could be a senior manager. Once again, you might be lucky guys on the call. It might be you. You've got to do it. But once again, whoever that person is, they need to know what they've got to do and how to do it. That's the most important thing for them to understand. And then the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle are our wonderful customers. Our internal customers, our staff, who are probably thinking, oh, it's nothing to do with me. I'm quite happy. I don't deal with this. It's somebody else's problem. I don't know what's going on. What's this all about? Everybody who works in the business needs to understand some basic information. It's a responsibility that's organisational wide. So everybody in the organisation needs to know what their responsibility is within the organisation when it comes to handling data. Not only is that important that they know to make sure that they comply, but that knowledge makes it easier for the practitioner to actually implement these changes. If the workforce are aware of why they're doing it, what they're supposed to do, if they're now being told they can't use USB sticks anymore, or they've got to sign into a new piece of software before they can access their system, they understand why where they're going to do that, and hopefully it'll make life a little bit easier for yourself. So those are the sort of the wheeze. So the next thing is the challenge of actually making it happen. Now, when we started looking at GDPR and you Googled it this time last year or towards the end of last year, there was very little on Google, very little on the internet. I did a search on the 1st of September, and there were 194,000 results in 30 days, 97,000 results in 7 days, and 96 results in the last 24 hours. There's just loads out there. There's so much, there's a tidal wave of information out there, and what we're finding is people are a bit overwhelmed. The pages and pages of people say, we can help you download this book, go and see here the 12 steps to this and the 10 steps to that, and there's a lot, there's an awful lot out there. There's so much information. You can go to classroom training courses, you can attend events you go to webinars, there's statutory guidance, there are white papers, there are consultants and there are lawyers, all there to help you and get information. There's a lot of information out there. and it is slightly overwhelming. Where do you start? How do you figure out what's relevant to you? Who can you trust to make sure you're getting the correct and the right advice? How much is it going to cost? How much do I need to spend? And who's got the time to go through everything and figure out what's noise and what's needed, and what's a repetition and what's an interpretation, and figuring that all out is quite tricky. So the good news is we've sort of kind of done it for you, really. So in combination with Piers and his team at Clayden Law, who have the legal knowledge and the specialist knowledge, and our experience of developing e-learning, we've worked together and brought everything really off from the internet. Well, everything from the internet would be a big package, but taken all the best stuff from the internet and all boiled it down into this simple, comprehensive, current, up-to-date suite of e-learning courses delivered on a cloud-based training portal, and additionally as well, Clayden Law very kindly offered as part of the package to provide a free 30-minute consultation to give the human element. So the concept really is that everything you need to know can be learnt from the online suite of online training courses that I'm going to show some of in a minute, and then to back that up, where you need to contextualize it to your CRM systems, or you need to ask some questions or some ambiguities you're not too sure about. Piers' team are on hand for all customers who've bought this product, and to help them with a free 30-minute consultation. And clearly Piers is there with his firm to come and talk to you individually and contract with you if you feel that's something that you would want to, that would be useful. So this is a table here. The lines or the rows are the courses, and the columns are the roles that we referred to earlier. So core, foundation, practitioner, and board, which, if you remember, core, all employees; foundation, the people who are doing it; practitioner, the person who's the buck stops here; and the board are the people who own and give direction to the business. And what we've done is, you can see, we've created a suite of 11 individual courses, each one lasting in the region of half an hour. And they do vary slightly, but very roughly you can see at the bottom how long each course lasts. And then working with Piers and his expert knowledge, decided, well, what do people need to know? So, for example, you can see that if you're all employees need to have an introduction to the background of GDPR, understand the basic definitions of principles of data sharing and what data is and what constitutes data and what individual rights are. That's kind of all they need to know. Board, slightly different. They need to know introduction and background, but look, they need to know number 7, sanctions, remedies, and liabilities. What's the liability of not getting it right? That's a message that anybody who owns a business really needs to understand. They might not need to know the rest. And then the foundation and practitioner, clearly they're the ones that need to know the most. So effectively, we've designed a training program that can be targeted to provide information that people need based upon their role, if you like, within GDPR. So I'm going to now quickly flick to the demonstration. So I need to bear with me as I bumble my way through this. Okay, so just before I go to there we go. So just quickly before this is this screen. This is our cloud-based learning management portal that you can see on the screen now, and this is basically where people will go, and we'll create accounts for an organisation. Every organisation will have their own account, and people will then go to this page, and they will be able to take their training, and you can see various different courses down here that they need to take. And the key thing, the reason we're putting it in a learning portal, is that we can then evidence the training that people have done. As Piers says, that's really one of the important steps to demonstrate compliance, that you've demonstrated and you have tangible evidence that people have had training, which is a really great benefit. So basically the course is launched, and this is the consent and conditions for processing. So I'm just going to run this sort of course for a few minutes and shut up, so you can hear and listen, and then I'll jump back in.
In this course, we will look at consent and the other ways in which organisations can legally process your data. So to make a start, please look at this consent form and select how it makes you feel. Requires positive action to indicate that you agree. The second tick box requires positive action to indicate that you don't agree. It's a bit of a trick. This would not satisfy the GDPR consent requirement, as it could be successfully argued that the wording and process used are confusing and ambiguous. How about this consent form? Do you feel the same way? We would imagine that this would bother most people too. You're not selecting tick boxes to opt in, which would be acceptable. You are having to select tick boxes to opt out. Again, under the GDPR, this could lead to a fine because inactivity, in this case failing to opt out, does not constitute consent. Here is one last example. How does this consent form make you feel? Okay, there is one positive here in that there are many affirmative opt-in options, and this complies with GDPR. In that, consent is being obtained separately for each purpose. But dotted in the maze of tick boxes are a couple of unsubscribe options. This does not comply with the GDPR, as it could be successfully argued that having opt-in and unsubscribe checkboxes at the same time is not clear. The GDPR defines consent as any freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes, by which he or she, by a statement or by a clear affirmative action, signifies agreement to the processing of personal data relating to him or her.
Okay, so I'll stop there, but you get the idea. There's a course, and it takes people through, asks some questions. At the end of the course, there'll be some form of test of knowledge, just to see what people have remembered, and then they'll progress through their training, doing the courses that they've been allocated. That will be tracked by the learning portal as they progress through. We can do things like give certificates. So you can have some kind of evidence that people have actually taken the training and have that as a hard copy tangible evidence. Also, within the courses themselves, we've signposted a lot of useful information. Piers has found lots of useful information. There's a lot of rubbish out there, and we've signposted some companies that are giving away freebies and privacy notices and so forth. So it's a good place for signposting as well to get useful information. What we've also done is provided links to people so they can go to relevant web pages, but we've also created downloadable content. So, for example, this one here, I just go to the screen, is a nicely formatted PDF document that basically summarises what's in the course and goes through the key elements of the course. And that's a downloadable, printable guide that people can take with them or use in training where perhaps the e-learning isn't available. So just finally flicking back now to the demonstration, past the demonstration. So just from our perspective, really, some of the benefits of having, as well as this auditing and recording, some of the benefits we think are it's actually cheaper. It's a no-brainer. We're IT people. We know online is cheaper than face-to-face. If you go out there, look at foundation and practitioner courses, they cost anything from £1,000 to £1,800 per person. Clearly, it's priced per person. You go there, you're there for 2 to 4 days. It's a lot of time out of the office, and with an e-learning suite, you don't have to clearly do that. And also, once you've got access to the e-learning, you can keep taking it again and again and again. So it becomes not just a one-off training hit for 2 to 4 days. It becomes something that's there in perpetuity for you. And working once again with Piers does deliver some of these sorts of workshops, and his colleagues, and yeah, he's confident with the amount of content that we've put into that. Certainly the foundation and practitioner courses is equivalent to probably about 4 days worth of training in an e-learning course. There's a lot of really good high quality content in there. This is why I asked Piers to close his ears a little bit, but typically, according to the team, SMEs will typically spend £3,000 or £4,000. So small companies don't necessarily spend less. Small companies, we're a small company, we're perhaps not as organised as some of the bigger companies might be, so some of the fees are maybe a little bit higher because we have to spend more time looking at our processes. But small companies will typically spend that sort of money on legal fees. Our e-learning, we haven't got pricing at this presentation. If you want pricing, Warren will be able to signpost you to us so you can get that, but our cost is significantly less than that. and as well as that, you get this consultation from Piers and his team. So it should save you money. The other big thing is it will save you time. You're sitting there wondering what to do. How much time it's supposed to be happening, and it is happening. It's law in May. You need to be compliant by May. You can spend a lot of time looking around, disseminating, finding out, sorting through, making sure you haven't missed it. We've done it. It's all there. Everything you need is in that e-learning suite, online training suite. So that hopefully will give you confidence that it's from somebody who know what they're doing. It's from a legal company, and it's going to save you a lot of time and effort. You can just get cracking. You can do it. And really, last but most importantly, everything is audited and it's all online. If you are fortunate enough to be audited, then being able to demonstrate a record of training will certainly, I believe, and Piers believes, help you. If you've been in breach but you have done a lot of training, and you've been in breach and you haven't got evidence of a lot of training, it's more likely you're going to be given a little bit more of a chance to defend your case, as it were. So that's the end of my presentation, and hand back over to Warren.
Superb, thanks Nick. Yeah, I hope you found that really useful for everyone that's attended this afternoon. A lot to consider in readiness for GDPR, but hopefully we've highlighted some useful points for you and also given you some potential solutions, especially through the educational content that Me Learning are doing in conjunction with Clayden Law. We'll be sending links to some of the resources that we've mentioned in this presentation, as well as the recorded webinar itself. That will be going out in the next 24 hours. We're going to pause for a moment to look at the questions that you've been asking. But if you are leaving us at this point, many thanks for your time this afternoon, and I hope you found it beneficial.